She broke in with a master key, sneering, 911 works for me. This HOA tyrant terrorized a family. Believing she was above the law, little did she know. An 11-year-old was secretly live streaming her every crime. Brace yourself for the epic moment her reign of terror implodes when the police see the undeniable proof. You won't believe the satisfying downfall. The bylaws are clear. Mr. Westbrook, Article 4, Section B, Paragraph 3, ornamental lawn flamingos are strictly prohibited. You have 48 hours to remove it, or you will be fined. Karen Delaney's voice, sharp as shattered glass, crackled through Mark Westbrook's phone, managing to sound both condescending and threatening despite the tinny speaker. Mark, a software engineer in his early 40s, pinched the bridge of his nose. He was debugging a particularly nasty piece of code, his mind deep in logic flows and syntax errors. The last thing he needed was another skirmish with the self-appointed queen of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. Karen, he began, striving for a patient tone. It's not a flamingo. It's a garden gnome, a small ceramic gnome, which Jake, my 11-year-old son, painted in his art class. It's by the rose bushes. A gnome, a flamingo, a plastic representation of a mythical creature. It's an unapproved lawn ornament. Mr. Westbrook, it detracts from the uniform aesthetic we strive to maintain in Meadowbrook. 48 hours. The click of her hanging up was as decisive as a gavel. Mark sighed, pushing his chair back. He glanced out the window of his home office. The small, brightly painted gnome stood proudly next to a struggling rosebush, a splash of cheerful color in the otherwise meticulously manicured, and frankly, somewhat bland landscape of their suburban street. Uniform aesthetic, that was Karen's mantra. She wielded the HOA bylaws like a weapon, ensuring Meadowbrook remained a place of oppressive neatness, where individual expression went to die a slow, beige death. He'd moved to Meadowbrook 2 years ago after his wife passed, hoping for a quiet, stable environment for Jake. And it was, for the most part, good schools, safe streets, friendly enough neighbors, if you didn't count Karen Delaney, who lived 3 doors down and seemed to derive her life's purpose from patrolling the neighborhood. Violation notices clutched in her hand. His son, Jake, was a good kid, bright, inquisitive, and thankfully resilient. He was currently in his room, probably engrossed in a live stream with his friends, a world away from HOA tyrants and their petty crusades. Cooper, their golden retriever, lay at Mark's feet, thumping his tail softly against the carpet. Oblivious to the brewing storm, the gnome wasn't the first issue. There was the incident with the basketball hoop, which Karen claimed was stored improperly, visible from the street by a fractional inch. Then there was the saga of the unapproved shade of trim paint on his mailbox post, a color that was, by Mark's meticulous cross-referencing, one of the 3 approved shades. Each time, Mark had tried to reason, to explain, only to be met with Karen's unyielding insistence and veiled threats of escalating fines. Most residents just capitulated. It was easier than fighting her. Mark, however, had a stubborn streak when it came to bullies. He decided to let the gnome issue rest for the evening. He had a deadline, and Jake would be expecting dinner soon. He'd deal with Karen and her flamingo gnome fixation tomorrow. Surely, a conversation, maybe with another HOA board member present, could resolve this absurdity. The next morning, however, brought a fresh assault. A bright orange violation sticker was plastered not on his front door, but directly onto the offending gnome itself. The adhesive was industrial strength, and part of Jake's careful paintwork peeled off with it. That crossed a line. This wasn't just about bylaws anymore. It was about maliciousness. Jake was crestfallen. She ruined him. Dad's Stripey was my best one. Mark felt a surge of anger, hotter than any Karen-induced irritation he had felt before. Okay, buddy, this has gone too far. I'm going to sort this out. He tried calling Karen. No answer. He emailed her, copying the other, mostly silent, members of the HOA board, detailing the damage to his son's property and requesting a formal meeting to discuss her escalating harassment. The only response was an automated out-of-office reply from Karen's email, stating she was conducting HOA business and would respond at her earliest convenience. Later that afternoon, while Mark was on a conference call, Cooper started barking, a deep, insistent woof he reserved for strangers at the door. Mark muted himself, annoyed. He wasn't expecting anyone. He walked to the front door, peering through the peephole. It was Karen Delaney. And she wasn't just standing on his porch. She was fiddling with his doorknob. Mark's blood ran cold. He had a smart lock, but he knew the HOA kept master keys for emergency access only, a vaguely defined term that Karen likely interpreted broadly. Surely, she wouldn't. He heard the distinct click of the deadbolt retracting, his deadbolt. Before he could react, his front door swung open, and Karen Delaney stepped into his hallway, a clipboard in one hand and a look of grim satisfaction on her face. She hadn't knocked. She hadn't rung the bell. She had used a key to enter his home. "Mr. Westbrook," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the foyer, as if she owned the place. "I'm here to conduct a follow-up inspection regarding the non-compliant lawn ornament and to ensure there are no other violations that require immediate remediation." Mark stared at her, speechless for a moment. The audacity was breathtaking. This wasn't just an HOA overstep. This was unlawful entry. His mind raced. Jake was upstairs, still on his live stream. Cooper was growling, a low rumble in his chest, hackles slightly raised. "Karen," Mark said, his voice dangerously quiet, "what do you think you're doing?" She barely glanced at him, her eyes already scanning his living room. "My duty, Mr. Westbrook, as an authorized representative of the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. I have the right to inspect properties to ensure compliance with the community bylaws. It's all in the covenants you agreed to when you purchased your home. You do not have the right to enter my home without my permission. Karen, that's breaking and entering." Karen finally focused on him, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, I don't think so. We have master keys for a reason. Emergencies. And this, your continued defiance, is escalating into an emergency for the community's standards. Besides," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, yet chillingly confident tone, "who are you going to call? The police, please. Around here. Mr. Westbrook, 911 works for me." She took another step into his living room, her gaze sweeping across his belongings, her posture radiating an unnerving sense of absolute authority. The problem, Mark realized, had just escalated from a dispute over a garden gnome to something far more sinister. He was a private man, his home, his sanctuary, and Karen Delaney had just kicked down the door. Little did she know. Upstairs, a pair of young ears had heard the commotion. Jake, ever curious, had muted his game audio when Cooper started barking. He'd heard the click of the lock, the unfamiliar voice booming downstairs. He crept to his door, phone still in hand, his live stream forgotten for a moment as a real-life drama began to unfold. He peeked through the crack. He saw the strange woman. He saw his dad's face, tight with anger. And he heard her declare that 911 worked for her. Jake's eyes widened. He knew that wasn't right. Without a second thought, his thumb, already hovering over his phone screen, tapped not back to his game, but to the bright green phone icon. And then, he pressed 3 numbers 911. His other thumb, almost by instinct, hit the Go Live button on his streaming app again, this time pointing his phone camera through the crack in the door. Mark's mind was a whirlwind. Karen Delaney, in his living room, uninvited, uttering threats and delusions of grandeur. 911 works for me. The sheer arrogance was galling. He could feel Cooper pressing against his leg, the dog's low growl a physical manifestation of Mark's own rising fury. He needed to stay calm, to handle this correctly. This woman was clearly unhinged. "Karen, I am telling you, as politely as I can, to leave my house immediately," Mark said, his voice level but firm, betraying none of the turmoil inside him. "You are trespassing. If you do not leave, I will call the police. Karen let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, Mr. Westbrook, always so dramatic. I am not trespassing. I am performing my duties. And please do call the police. I'd welcome it. They know me. They know the HOA. They'll understand who's really upholding the standards in this community. She gestured vaguely around his living room. For instance, these window coverings, are they HOA approved? I'll need to check the latest guidelines on fabric density and color palettes. She actually took a step towards his window, reaching out a hand as if to touch the curtains. This was surreal. Mark felt a disconnect, as if he were watching a poorly written play. But the threat was real, the violation palpable. His home, his sanctuary, was being defiled by this woman's petty tyranny. The impact was immediate. A knot of anger and helplessness tightened in his chest. His sense of security, already fragile since his wife's passing, felt like it was being systematically dismantled by this power-mad neighbor. Do not touch my things, Karen, Mark warned, his voice dropping an octave. You have no right. Cooper, sensing the shift in Mark's tone, let out a single, sharp bark. Karen flinched, her composure momentarily slipping. She glared at the retriever. And that animal, is it properly licensed with the county? And I trust its vaccinations are up to date. Uncontrolled animals can be a nuisance. Mr. Westbrook? Before Mark could retort, a new sound pierced the charged atmosphere, the faint but unmistakable wail of distant sirens. Karen's head snapped up, a flicker of something, surprise annoyance in her eyes. Well, it seems someone has called them, perhaps one of your more sensible neighbors, concerned by your resistance. She smoothed down the front of her blazer, a smug look returning to her face. This will all be sorted out shortly. They'll see I'm merely trying to maintain order. Mark's heart leaped. Jake. It had to be Jake. His son, his quiet, observant son, had taken action. A wave of pride, sharp and fierce, cut through his anger. He just hoped Jake was safe, and that he hadn't put himself in any kind of trouble. The sirens grew louder, closer. Red and blue lights began to flash through the front windows, casting dancing shadows on Karen Delaney's triumphant face. She actually straightened up, as if preparing to receive an award. You see, Mr. Westbrook, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The authorities are here. They'll handle this, and then we can discuss the fines you'll be incurring for your non-compliance. And now for your obstructive behavior. Mark remained silent, his gaze fixed on the front door. He could hear car doors slamming outside, the murmur of voices. He saw the shadow of a uniformed officer pass by the window. Then a firm, authoritative knock on the door, not the tentative rap of a neighbor, but the unmistakable knock of law enforcement. Go ahead, Karen, Mark said quietly. Answer it. Since they work for you. A brief flash of uncertainty crossed her face, but she quickly masked it. Certainly. She marched to the door and pulled it open with a flourish. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the threshold. Officer Miller, a man in his late 30s with a weary but professional demeanor, and Officer Ramirez, a younger, sharper-looking woman. Ma'am, sir, Officer Miller began, his eyes taking in the scene, Karen standing proudly. Mark a few feet behind her, his expression unreadable. Cooper sitting alertly by Mark's side. We received a 911 call from this address. Is everything all right here? Everything is far from all right, officer, Karen declared, stepping aside to grant them entry, as if welcoming them into her own domain. Thank goodness you're here. I'm Karen Delaney, Meadowbrook HOA board member. I was conducting a necessary property inspection due to multiple bylaw violations by this resident. Mr. Westbrook, she gestured dismissively towards Mark. He has been uncooperative, belligerent, and frankly, threatening. Officer Miller looked from Karen to Mark. Mr. Westbrook, what's your side of this? This woman, Karen Delaney, Mark stated clearly, used an HOA master key to unlawfully enter my home without my permission. I was on a business call. My son is upstairs. She refused to leave when I asked her to. She is trespassing. I want her removed from my property, and I want to press charges. Karen gasped theatrically. That is an outrageous lie. I have every right to be here. The HOA covenants clearly state. Ma'am, Officer Ramirez interjected, her tone polite but firm. Do you have a warrant to enter this residence? A warrant? Karen scoffed. I don't need a warrant. I'm HOA. We have emergency access protocols. His continued violations were creating an emergency situation threatening property values. An unapproved garden gnome threatens property values to the extent of a warrantless entry, Officer Miller asked. One eyebrow raised. The twist, the escalation, was the arrival of the police, but not in the way Karen had anticipated. She clearly expected them to be her enforcers, to validate her authority. Instead, they were questioning it, the power dynamic she had so carefully constructed in her mind, where she was the ultimate authority, was beginning to crumble. It's the principle of the matter, officer, Karen insisted, her voice rising in pitch. It's about upholding the rules that everyone agreed to. He's been cited multiple times. He's defiant. He needs to learn that the rules apply to him too. Her gaze fell on Cooper, and his aggressive animal lunged at me. Cooper, who had remained seated, merely let out a soft woof as if in mild protest at the accusation. Ma'am, we received a call from an 11-year-old boy, a Mr. Jake Westbrook, Officer Ramirez said, consulting her notepad. He stated that a woman had broken into his house and was threatening his father. He sounded quite distressed. Karen's face, which had been flushed with righteous indignation, paled slightly. A child? He's probably mistaken, confused. Children exaggerate. Mr. Westbrook has likely coached him. Mark felt a cold fury. Don't you dare accuse my son. Sir, please. Officer Miller cautioned Mark, then turned back to Karen. Ms. Delaney, did you use a key to enter this home without Mr. Westbrook's explicit, immediate permission? I used the HOA emergency key, yes. Karen admitted, but quickly added, as is my right under the bylaws for urgent matters. He wouldn't answer his door. I had to ensure there wasn't a more serious issue, like a gas leak or squatters. The excuse sounded weak even to her own ears. The officers exchanged a glance. So, no immediate evidence of a life-threatening emergency, like fire or a medical crisis. Before you entered, Officer Ramirez pressed. The emergency was his blatant disregard for community standards. Karen almost shrieked, her composure rapidly fraying. He was making a mockery of the HOA. This is harassment of an HOA official performing her duties. You should be arresting him for interfering. It was then that Jake appeared at the top of the stairs. He was holding his phone. Its screen dark now, but he clutched it like a lifeline. His eyes were wide, but he looked more determined than scared. Cooper trotted to the bottom of the stairs, looking up at Jake and wagging his tail. Jake, are you okay? Mark called out, his voice filled with concern. Jake nodded. I'm okay, Dad. His gaze then shifted to the police officers, and then, with a distinct flicker of apprehension, to Karen Delaney. Karen saw him. There he is, the boy who made the false report, officers. You need to talk to him about the seriousness of misusing 911. Officer Miller looked up at Jake. Young man, are you Jake Westbrook? Jake nodded again. Did you call 911? Yes, sir, Jake said, his voice surprisingly steady. Can you tell us why? Before Jake could answer, Karen interrupted. It's obvious his father put him up to it to cause trouble for me. He's trying to intimidate the HOA. Ma'am, please let the boy speak. Officer Ramirez said firmly. All eyes turned to Jake. The living room, once Mark's private space, now felt like a stage. The unfolding drama holding everyone captive. The weight of the situation seemed to settle on Jake's small shoulders. But he stood tall. The twist wasn't just the police arriving. It was the dawning realization on Karen's face that her presumed authority was not recognized. And the quiet, undeniable presence of Jake, the catalyst she had utterly failed to account for. Jake took a deep breath, his small hand still clutching his smartphone. All adult eyes in the room were fixed on him. Officer Miller, with a gentle expression, prompted him. Jake, can you tell us what happened? Why did you call 911? She came into our house, Jake began, his voice a little shaky but clear. He pointed a hesitant finger towards Karen Delaney, who watched him with a hawk-like intensity, her arms crossed tightly. Dad was on a call in his office. Cooper started barking a lot. I heard the front door open, but I didn't hear anyone knock. Then I heard her talking loud to Dad. She said 911 works for her. Karen scoffed audibly. Preposterous. He's twisting my words. I simply meant the police understand HOA matters. Ma'am, let him finish. Officer Ramirez said, her gaze unwavering on Karen for a moment before returning to Jake with an encouraging nod. She was yelling at Dad. Jake continued, gaining a bit more confidence, saying he was defiant and that she could come into our house because of the HOA. Dad told her to leave, but she wouldn't. She said she was going to inspect our things. He looked at his father, then back at the officers. I was scared she was going to hurt Dad, or that Dad would get into big trouble because she sounded so bossy and mean. And when she said that about 911 working for her, I thought I should call the real 911 because that didn't sound right. Mark felt a lump in his throat. His son, trying to protect him, navigating this adult mess with a child's pure sense of justice. And you said she was threatening your father, Officer Miller asked. She was loud and angry. Jake affirmed. She said he was going to be fined and that she had rights in our house. It felt like a threat. Karen finally exploded. This is a fabrication of coach performance by a disrespectful child encouraged by a delinquent father. Officers, I am the victim. Here I am being harassed and obstructed while performing my legal duties for the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association. I demand that you address his illegal entry accusations against me and then deal with his multiple bylaw infractions. Her voice was shrill, her face flushed a dangerous shade of red, the carefully constructed facade of the calm, authoritative HOA representative was cracking, revealing the furious entitlement beneath. Ms. Delaney, Officer Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin. We are trying to ascertain the facts. Your agitation is not helping. He turned back to Jake. Jake, you mentioned this woman said 911 works for her. Is there anything else that happened? Jake hesitated for a fraction of a second, then seemed to make a decision. He lifted his phone. I was live streaming with my friends when it started. When I heard her downstairs, so I sort of kept it going, and I pointed the camera through the crack in my door. A profound silence descended upon the room. Mark stared at his son, stunned. A live stream. He hadn't even considered that. Karen Delaney froze mid-rant, her mouth slightly agape. Officers Miller and Ramirez exchanged a quick, significant look. You what? Karen stammered, her voice suddenly devoid of its earlier bluster. The color drained from her face, replaced by a ghastly pallor. You have a recording of this incident, young man, Officer Ramirez asked, her voice sharp with new interest. This changed things. Significantly, eyewitness testimony was one thing. Digital evidence was another. Jake nodded, looking a little overwhelmed by the sudden shift in focus but resolute. Yes, ma'am, it's on my stream. My friends were watching. They were all asking what was happening. The revelation hung in the air, a hidden truth now brought to light. The power dynamic, which Karen had fought so desperately to control, had just been irrevocably inverted by an 11-year-old boy and his smartphone. Her claims, her authority, her carefully constructed narrative, all were now potentially about to be shredded by an unblinking digital eye. That's an invasion of my privacy, Karen shrieked, finding her voice again, though it was now laced with a distinct note of panic. He can't record me without my permission. That's illegal. Officers, arrest him. He's the one breaking the law. Actually, ma'am, Officer Miller stated calmly, in this state, As long as one party to a conversation is aware of the recording, it is generally legal, especially if it's in a place where there isn't a reasonable expectation of privacy. And since you entered his home, and he was a party to the events, it's unlikely to be an illegal recording. Furthermore, if a crime was being committed, recording it is often considered permissible. He looked at Jake. Son, would you be willing to show us this recording? Mark stepped forward. Officers, if this helps clarify what happened, then absolutely, Jake. It's okay. Show them. He put a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. Jake nodded and tapped at his phone screen. After a few seconds, he said, It's queued up from when she came in. Just as Jake was about to angle the phone for the officers to see, the front door, still ajar, was pushed open further, and a new figure stepped inside. He was older, with a sterner, more authoritative air than the two officers already present, his uniform denoting a higher-ranked police chief Harrison. He was a man known for his no-nonsense approach and his deep ties to the community, someone who knew Meadowbrook in its occasional HOA dramas, but usually from a distance. Miller, Ramirez, what's the situation here? Chief Harrison asked, his gaze sweeping the room, taking in Karen, Mark, Jake, and the palpable tension. Dispatch said something about a potential unlawful entry and an HOA dispute escalating. Ms. Delaney, I see you're present. This seems to be a recurring theme. His tone was neutral, but there was an underlying weariness when he addressed Karen. Karen, momentarily thrown by the chief's unexpected arrival, seemed to see a new opportunity, a lifeline. Surely the chief, a man of authority, would understand her position. Chief Harrison, thank heavens you're here, she gushed, rushing towards him. These officers are not taking my official complaint seriously. This man, she pointed dramatically at Mark, is making baseless accusations against me after I, in my official HOA capacity, attempted to address his serious bylaw violations. He's had his son make a false 911 call, and now they're claiming to have some sort of doctored recording to slander me. Chief Harrison held up a hand and, halting her tirade, Ms. Delaney, let's take a breath. Officers, update me. Officer Miller quickly summarized the situation, the 911 call from Jake, Mark's claim of unlawful entry, Karen's counterclaims of performing HOA duties, and the new revelation of Jake's Livestream recording. The chief's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of a recording. A recording, you say? He looked at Jake, his expression softening a little. Young man, what did you record? Everything. Sir, Jake said, his voice small but firm. From when she came in our door, I can show you. I object, Karen cried out. This is inadmissible. It's a violation of my rights. It's probably fake. Chief Harrison ignored her. Officer Ramirez, perhaps you and Jake could step into the kitchen where it's a bit quieter. Let's see what this recordings contain. Mr. Westbrook, you can accompany them. He then fixed Karen with a stern look. Ms. Delaney, you will remain here with Officer Millen and myself, and you will remain silent until I ask you to speak. Is that understood? Karen's mouth opened and closed a few times, but the chief's unyielding stare seemed to finally cow her into a semblance of submission. She nodded curtly, her face a mask of fury and dawning fear. The shift in power was now absolute. She was no longer the one giving orders or making demands. She was a potential suspect in a police investigation, her fate now hanging on the contents of an 11-year-old's video file. Mark, Jake, and Officer Ramirez moved towards the kitchen. Jake's hands were slightly trembling as he held out his phone. Mark gave his shoulder a reassuring squeeze. You did good, son. Just show her. In the kitchen, Jake tapped his screen. The small speaker crackled to life. First, they heard Cooper's agitated barking. Then, clear as day, the sound of the front door deadbolt retracting, followed by the door swinging open. Karen Delaney's voice filled the small kitchen, sharp and imperious. Mr. Westbrook, I'm here to conduct a follow-up inspection. Officer Ramirez leaned closer, her expression intent. On the small screen, they could see a slice of the hallway and living room, viewed from a low angle, partially obscured by the doorframe, Jake's vantage point. They saw Mark confronting Karen. They heard him tell her she was trespassing. And then, the damning words, spoken with chilling confidence by Karen Delaney's recorded voice. "Who are you going to call the police, please? Around here. Mr. Westbrook. 911 works for me." Officer Ramirez's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She listened as the recording continued, documenting Karen's refusal to leave, her threats of fines, her dismissive attitude, and her false claim that Cooper had lunged at her. The entire illegal entry, the arrogance, the intimidation, all captured, back in the living room. Chief Harrison was questioning Officer Miller about previous HOA-related calls involving Miss Delaney. Miller was choosing his words carefully, but a picture of escalating complaints and Karen's aggressive enforcement tactics was beginning to emerge. Karen stood stiffly, her gaze darting between the chief and the kitchen doorway, a muscle twitching in her jaw. The hidden truth, her systematic abuse of power, was on the verge of full exposure. The resistance from Mark, amplified by Jake's irrefutable evidence, was not just pushing back, it was about to bring her entire charade crashing down. The sound of Karen's recorded voice, uttering the 911 works for me line, was faint but audible even from the kitchen. Chief Harrison paused, his head tilting. Officer Miller also caught it. Karen Delaney heard it too. She visibly flinched, as if struck. The bravado, the indignation, the self-righteousness, all seemed to drain out of her, leaving behind a woman who looked suddenly older, smaller, and deeply afraid. Officer Ramirez emerged from the kitchen, her expression grim but resolute. She held Jake's phone carefully. Mark and Jake followed, Jake now looking less overwhelmed and more like a boy who knew he'd done the right thing, albeit with a touch of nervousness about the adult consequences unfolding. Cooper, who had been anxiously pacing between the living room and kitchen, let out a soft whine and nudged Jake's hand with his nose. "Chief," Officer Ramirez began, her voice carrying the weight of indisputable evidence. "The recording is clear. It corroborates Mr. Westbrook's statement and young Jake's account. Miss Delaney entered the residence without permission using a key. She was asked to leave and refused. And the statement about 911 was made, exactly as Jake reported." Chief Harrison's gaze, cold and hard, settled on Karen Delaney. She seemed to shrink under its intensity. The fight was gone from her, replaced by a desperate, cornered look. Her carefully cultivated image of untouchable HOA authority lay in tatters around her expensive, HOA-approved sensible shoes. "Karen Delaney," Chief Harrison said, his voice devoid of any warmth or familiarity he might have previously shown. "Based on the testimony and the digital evidence presented, I am placing you under arrest for criminal trespass and attempted intimidation." "No," Karen shrieked, a raw, panicked sound. "You can't. It's a misunderstanding, the bylaws. The HOA board will hear about this. I have rights. I was doing my job." "Your job does not include illegally entering private residences and intimidating homeowners." "Ms. Delaney," Chief Harrison stated flatly. "Officer Miller, please cuff her." The hero's rise was quiet but profound. Mark Westbrook, the unassuming software engineer who just wanted a peaceful life for his son, had stood his ground. He hadn't sought confrontation. But when it invaded his home, he had met it with resolute calm. And Jake, his 11-year-old son, had demonstrated courage and quick thinking far beyond his years. His live stream, initially a youthful pastime, had become the instrument of justice, a modern-day slingshot against a Goliath of petty tyranny. Officer Miller stepped forward, pulling out his handcuffs. Karen recoiled. "Don't you touch me. This is an outrage. I am a respected member of this community. I will sue. I will sue all of you, Mark Westbrook. You will pay for this, you and your delinquent child." Her threats, once chilling, now sounded like the desperate flailing of a drowning woman. "Miss Delaney, you have the right to remain silent." Officer Miller recited, his voice professional and impersonal as he took her arm. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be appointed to you. Tears of rage and humiliation streamed down Karen's face as the handcuffs clicked shut behind her back. The image of the powerful HOA enforcer was shattered, replaced by that of a common criminal. Her authority revealed as nothing more than self-delusion. The villain's fall was swift and absolute, broadcast not just to Jake's online friends, but now, metaphorically, to the entire community that had lived under the shadow of her oppressive reign. Chief Harrison turned to Mark. Mr. Westbrook, we will need a copy of that recording, and both you and Jake will need to provide official statements down at the station. I apologize for what you and your son have been through today. This kind of behavior is unacceptable, regardless of any HOA affiliation. He then looked at Jake with a genuinely appreciative smile. Young man, you showed remarkable presence of mind and courage. You did a very brave thing. Your father should be very proud of you. Jake blushed but stood a little taller. Mark put his arm around his son's shoulders, a surge of overwhelming pride and relief washing over him. I am, Chief, more than words can say. Cooper wagged his tail enthusiastically, seeming to understand the shift in atmosphere. As Officer Miller escorted a now sobbing and sputtering Karen Delaney out of the house and towards a waiting patrol car. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the police presence. They watched in stunned silence as the infamous HOA enforcer was led away in handcuffs. The whispers started almost immediately. The reign of Karen Delaney was over. The resolution was decisive. There were no open timelines, no lingering doubts. The evidence was irrefutable. Later that day, after giving their statements, Mark and Jake returned home. The little ceramic gnome, though still bearing the scar from Karen's violation sticker, seemed to stand a little prouder by the rose bushes. News of Karen's arrest spread through Meadowbrook like wildfire. The other HOA board members, who had long been cowed by Karen's aggressive dominance, quickly convened an emergency meeting, faced with the undeniable evidence and the potential for a massive lawsuit against the HOA for enabling Karen's behavior. They issued a formal apology to the Westbrook family. Karen Delaney was immediately and permanently removed from her position on the board. The HOA's master key policy was suspended pending a full review and legal consultation. Mark knew there might be legal proceedings to follow, but the immediate threat was gone. His home was his sanctuary once more. The climactic confrontation had ended not with a bang, but with the click of handcuffs and the quiet whir of a smartphone saving a video file. That evening, Jake was back online, not playing games, but talking to his friends, who were now hailing him as a local hero. Mark watched him for a moment, a deep sense of peace settling over him. He had chosen Meadowbrook for quiet stability, and while Karen Delaney had temporarily shattered that, the incident had, in an unexpected way, brought the community closer. People stopped by, offering support, sharing their own past run-ins with Karen. A collective sigh of relief palpable in the neighborhood. The ending was more than satisfying. It was a restoration of order, a triumph of ordinary decency over petty despotism. Mark Westbrook hadn't sought to be a hero, but by protecting his home and his son, he had become one in the eyes of his community. And Jake, with his quick thinking and his live stream, had shown that even the smallest voice, armed with truth, could bring down the most arrogant bully. Cooper, loyal Cooper, lay at Jake's feet, his tail thumping a steady rhythm of contentment, a furry guardian in a home where peace had finally, and definitively, been restored. The power of 911 works for me had been unequivocally and very publicly disproven in Meadowbrook. Justice, it turned out, worked for everyone.